it's a list of things. I can pull it up in a little bit, and we can discuss what all the things are. But it does make it difficult for the people who are financially struggling to get to the polls. Right. People who are having health issues. Now you must go through a list of things to prove you have these health issues. And before you can even submit a absentee ballot, that most of us, look, we just have health issues and we just gonna mail it in. Now you gotta go through this litany of things to prove you have this health issue to have the allowance to to present an absentee ballot.
But let's talk about the system for a second, right? Because what I've learned is I'm becoming somewhat of a historian, right? I'm just diving deep as I go on this path. And there was so let's go all the way back. And y'all, and I'm gonna explain to you how things don't move much, right? So black folks were slaves, were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, right? It's 1865.
Allegedly.
Mm-hmm. Right, allegedly. 1865, right?
Right.
So bust it. 1870, that was the 15th Amendment. That gave black people, slaves, the right to vote, right? So what did they do then? For the longest time, I believe 95 years, there were still things in place that stopped black people from being able to vote. So like, you're freed 5 years ago and now you're allowed to vote, right? So then when you go to the polls, they say, here's a literacy test. Can you read? Let's be real. 5 years ago, if you knew how to read, you would have been hung. You would have been lynched, right? That's voter suppression, right? Or do you own property, sir? You know, if you don't own property, they would say, oh, they'd turn you around, right? And because we weren't educated as a people, we just got our rights. We didn't know what was and was not true. But these were strategies that were used all throughout the South, Atlanta included, North Carolina included, right? So then civil rights comes, right? Now we're in the 60s, right? Like 90 years later. And now we're in this space where enough is enough, you know, and we're marching. You have your Martin Luther King, who, he was killed, the anniversary of his death is tomorrow. So it's extremely dope that we're even having this conversation right now, right? So he died for this, right? And we're in Atlanta. We're in Atlanta the day before MLK's death, talking about voter suppression, right? And he died, 58 years ago?
Right.
Tomorrow or something like that?
Yeah.
Why are we still having this conversation? Right? But let's not get too far off the mark, right? So then Kennedy comes. Kennedy's acting as though he cares for black folks. You know, he's meeting with, some of the leaders. And then, what happens to him happens. He's assassinated. That brings in LBJ. LBJ has to continue down the path of the civil rights movement that was already in place. He cannot stop that train from coming with everything that we've seen thus far. So what does he do? In 1965, 95 years after we get the bill that says we're allowed to vote, he signs into the Voting Rights Act. And I might not have said it correctly, right? But what is that? That's put in place to say, stop messing with black folks when they come to these polls, right? And not only that, it's mandated by the president. What does that mean? That makes it federal. What does federal mean? That means every state has to abide, because all of these states was doing whatever they needed and wanted to do to keep black folks out of the poll box. You know what I'm saying? So, right, here we are, it's 1965, now that's in place. No more literacy tests, no more do you own property, no more grandfather clauses, no more any of this stuff, right? But bust it. Now here we are in 2020, voting, right? Trying to get Trump out, trying to keep Trump in, whatever your stance is what you're trying to do, right?
Right.
And what do you see? You see governors in Houston. You see governors in different states, because they've given the power back to the states. They set us back 200 years. You understand? Like 150 years. So like, what happened to that Voting Rights Act in which we were said you can no longer mess with black folks state to state?
Yes.
They gave the power back to the states to do whatever they wanted to do. They used the pandemic to set us back as far as our voting rights is concerned. You know what I'm saying? So like, what needs to happen is true laws to be enforced. and stop letting you get what I'm saying? Because like when you give the power back to the states, and that's what happened with the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. Like Cuomo is in New York saying New York is going to do this, and then Trump is in daggone D.C. saying no, New York is going to do what I tell you to. And what did Cuomo say? I abide by the Constitution, and the Constitution says you cannot come in here and tell me what to do. I run my own state, and that's where we are, right? So what has to happen is there has to be federal laws passed, and they have to be stuck to. The problem that we're seeing now is that those amendments, or like an executive order that says, let's change this up right quick, you know what I'm saying, to suppress the vote. So like, we're going to keep on facing it until something is actually federally mandated, and then it's actually enforced. That's it.